Okay, thank you, Marimba. We can get started.
Okay. Welcome everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board to order. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Please mute yourself if you are not speaking. If you would like to ask a question or give comment today, please use the raise your hand function. We ask that you turn on your cameras so that your name appears when you speak. Please feel free to cover the camera on your device if you do not want to appear on screen. Kirk, if you walk us through some of the policies and procedures.
Yes, thank you, Marimba. Next slide. And so at first I wanted to just state some of the reinvestment fund guidelines. As a reminder, the conflict of interest policy is that each member of the advisory board shall, at the beginning of his or her term, execute an acknowledgement of the reinvestment fund's policy regarding conflicts of interest in the form attached hereto as a part of Exhibit B. If a board member has not submitted their conflicts of interest forms, they will not be able to participate in discussions, motions, or votes.
Thank you,
Next.
Kirk. I'm going to ask Councilman to do the roll call.
I am present. Marimba Alliance is present. Richard Witherspoon, are you with us?
Present.
Present.
Yep, I see him. Miss Collins, I saw earlier.
Present.
Reverend Grayson, I believe, is here.
Present.
Mr. George, I saw. Dr. Ellis, are you with us? I do not see Dr. Ellis. Is Miss Wolf with us? I don't see her. Mr. Craig is not with us. We still need to fill Sarah's spot. I don't believe Lisa is with us. Sala is not with us, nor is DeWitt, but there is a majority of voting members present.
Thank you, Councilman. We'll jump right into new business. The advisory board meetings through 2025 have been updated. I believe that you all have received those dates, but Kirk, can you just walk us through that quickly? And then we'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting dates through the end of 25.
Thank you, Marimba. And again, I apologize to the advisory board members for just some of my scheduling errors as I work through these things. But the good news is that we still will be able to have a monthly meeting through the end of 2025. We are keeping the original date in September, which is Thursday the 18th from 2:30 to 4 p.m. And then for the remainder of the year, we will transition to a 3:30 to 5 p.m. time slot, Thursday, October 22nd, Thursday, November 12th, and Thursday, December 16th.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve these meeting dates through December of 2025.
So moved.
Moved.
All in favor? Can I
Aye.
get a second? Excuse me, can I get a second?
Second from Reverend Grayson.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any against? Anyone abstaining? Okay, the motion passes. Next, we'll cover the proposed funding guidelines. Kirk?
Yes. And so, as you guys know, in our advisory board meeting on July 30th, I think we took some significant steps forward in terms of presenting 4 different guidelines for our advisory board members to respond to in hopes of getting approval so that we could go to either the September URA meeting or the October URA meeting and begin getting funds out into the community. The guidelines that we presented were related to children's, youth, and education, workforce development initiatives, development initiative program, and MWBE initiatives. We had a very robust discussion last month in relation to those guidelines, and it was decided by this board to go into committee to continue to work through those guidelines, again, in an effort to be able to advance them as quickly as possible. And it was exciting to see that we were able to have 2 committee meetings. And again, this is just in about 3 weeks' time, both on 8/13 and 8/20, to review drafted guidelines for those four programs that I mentioned. And so what I wanted to do today was give a high-level overview of some of those discussions. Any committee members who are part of these meetings, if there's any key information I'm leaving out, feel free to jump in. But I think by giving you some high-level feedback and then giving you some recommendations in terms of adjustments to those guidelines, again, I'm hopeful and confident this gets us closer to approval. And so children's youth and education is the first guideline that I would like to discuss. Based off the conversation we had as a board last month, the guidelines did generally have some strong support. There were questions that remained about what is the total amount of grants we would want to award. I believe the line item for children's youth and education is somewhere around 240,000. And I think that's still a question that the board needs to work through. However, we felt confident in the total amount of funding being up to 25,000. And then we just had some spirited discussion around some eligible uses of funds that weren't clearly articulated when I first presented those guidelines. And so one of those key pieces was adding language around facility upgrades and repairs, especially as it relates to compliance. And I know that there's some feedback that URA may have around that or some questions. And I do want to open the floor in a second. I wanted to just talk through some of the other pieces we discussed. We talked about adding language around childcare providers. The way we had written the guideline initially did not explicitly call out the possibilities for some of those funds to be used for early learning and pre-K. And so we want to work in some language that ensures that childcare providers who may seek grants from the Children's Youth and Education line item are licensed as childcare providers, et cetera. And then we just kind of highlighted the eligible grantees. I think we wanted to make sure that individuals who weren't necessarily a part of a 501c3 organization could have fiscal sponsorship from a 501c3 designated organization. That was important. And then ineligible grantees were just an individual or a for-profit organization or a nonprofit that does not serve children and youth from the Greater Hill District. So I want to take a second to maybe invite Julia and or Alex to just talk about some of the thoughts you have around including funding for facilities upgrades as part of this guideline.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirk. I think the biggest issue right now, I think that we need it's really just a question of staffing and capacity. I think it's something that we have to talk about internally at the URA, just about having staff, having some, if we're doing facility upgrades, that means we need someone from our construction team, our QC&I team to go out and, make sure it's, project is, like work through the bidding process, work with contractors, make sure everything's inspected.
Julia, you may have cut off.
Properly, everything's permitted, about this item. So I think that's something that I can't answer. I think that's a question for leadership, but I just wanted to flag that here that I think that's something we need to talk about before we can, 100% sign off on this line item.
Thank you, Julia. And just to recap so everyone's aware, to roughly paraphrase, there's some concern about some of the added admin that may be related to the construction or quality assurance or inspection. And that was where there was some conversation around whether or not this would be a good fit. Alicia, I see your raised hand and I would love for you to add your thoughts. You're on mute, Alicia. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the point about the staffing and all of that, but I don't think that is a URA function. Child care facilities fall under the state, the county, and the city. So any inspections, if we were to build, we'd have to go through the city or permit process. We would have to notify state and all of that. So unless you're going to take on and provide an extra layer for child care facilities. We already do that. We deal with inspectors. It seems to me that in this case, for instance, if someone wants a sidewalk and they need it for compliance, by the way, that's chapter 55, 3270 PA code, then it should go through Kirk, not URA. And maybe Kirk can inform, and then he can go determine what the permit, whether they had the permit, whether they completed the job. And then someone from, I know with me, my state licensing person will come up to say, oh, this passes for the state. I don't see that as a URA function. And frankly, it just seems like that's more of a project management, something that would go through Kirk. And it would add an extra layer to childcare facilities. And we never answer to the URA. So why would we do that now? So I'm thinking in many ways that this would be an overreach for URA staff, particularly when we have Kirk as our project manager.
Thank you, Alicia. Any response?
The reason I'm saying that, because the URA cannot issue us licenses like this. This comes from the state. We have county permits and things like that posted. The city, we have to meet their requirements. So I've never known this to be a URA function. Seems more like a project management.
Hey,
Thank
Alicia,
you,
thanks. This
Alicia.
is
That is
Yeah.
my thought.
Alex?
We've been doing this for a while and I've never worked with URA on this.
Yeah. Alex, can you first identify yourself so that the listening public knows who you are?
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Monroe. I'm Alex Thomas. I'm the URA's associate counsel. Alicia, thanks for kind of raising that issue. I think what we're referring to this as more of a general grant compliance matter. Generally, you know, when the URA funds construction, it's doing it through. It will send our in-house inspectors to make sure that the work is done in accordance with the grant documents, reviewing permits. Because we're a public agency and our funds do trigger prevailing wage, we're monitoring prevailing wage payrolls. We'll kind of need to review scopes of work. There's a lot of kind of grant compliance, not necessarily like we're not issuing license or permits or anything like that. That is kind of the realm of the city, but from just administering our grant funding, funding construction kind of carries a whole host of additional requirements that you know, it does add a significant amount of staff time. So that's kind of where Julia was coming from, where if we're funding construction, then we kind of need to have a little more of an active role in monitoring that work.
I understand that, but you're talking specifically about childcare facilities, Alex, and I'm sure you haven't done that with childcare facilities. I understand other developments. So I would say still, even based on what you're saying, that's a project manager's position.
Yeah, and I mean, our concern is that this kind of engages multiple people across the URA.
Well, if you want to add multiple
yeah.
people, yes, that would be on something that you would do, but I would not advise the fund to fund that when it's not really necessary. Because even if you agree or disagree, that what are you going to do? Argue with the state or the county or the city? I mean, because that's really what child facilities do in terms of who we're regulated by. I understand other construction projects and things like that, but we're talking specifically childcare facilities in the state, the county, and the city have specific guidelines for that.
Yeah, I think we're
I don't see
kind of
a
where
staff needed is what I'm saying.
okay. Yeah, I think we're approaching it mostly from a grant management side and a project management, where there is kind of that additional layer because it is construction. We generally wouldn't kind of dispute or question any sort of permits that are being provided by the county or the city or even the state.
Well, then that would be an extra cost to the fund, and it would be an unnecessary thing if you're not going to dispute it. Why are we adding an extra layer and more costs? I mean, that's what I'm saying, Alex, and I'm not going to really change that because this is what we do, you know? And URA has never, ever dealt or I've dealt with you guys on that. And even if you do disagree or dispute, or if you're not going to dispute, it really doesn't impact childcare facilities under PA Code 55. I'm sorry, 3270, it does not. So I just think it's an extra added layer, an extra added cost to the fund. And from what I heard at the last meeting, these costs are getting exorbitant. And that's one thing on my mind. And why add extra staff? That sounds like a project manager position.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Yeah, well, when we
Guys
can
will
take a look at these
into that.
guidelines,
Alex,
we'll.
can you look into that a little more?
Mhm.
And then see what we're talking about? It's all in the codes, it's all there. Okay? Because
Yeah,
childcare
we can do that,
facilities
Alicia.
are different than normal development.
Of course, yeah, we can look into that and kind of consider this.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, the other thing, I do want to note that Alicia brought up a point that probably would have gone under old business, and there were a number of items that I want to remind us about that I think we need from the URA. We need the current LRTA fund amount, just as a perfunctory report to the committee as well as the public. And we also were supposed to receive the invoices to date from the URA for their administrative fee of 10% of the fund. So I want to put that out there because I think that it ties into Alicia's. In some ways, it intersects with Alicia's point of administrative costs, and then we have the administrative cost of the staff at the URA, and we also have the staffing cost of our project manager. And so I think that the staffing approach to the project was intended to address all of the needs of the committee. So I do think that it's worth doing a deeper dive into why additional costs would be coming the fund's way for this particular scope. And I think the final question is the use of LRTA funds. And my understanding, and perhaps we can talk about this offline, was that those funds have a bit more flexibility than traditional funds, as this is not, I guess I'd like to get some clarity. This may be a Councilman Lavelle question. This may be a Sushila Director Namangi Stanger question, but essentially these funds aren't like URA funds. These funds are being held at the URA, and they come from the three taxing bodies. And so we want to make sure that we delineate between money that came from the URA and money that came from the three taxing bodies that's sitting at the URA, and the flexibility that we can have as a result. So I don't want us to get bogged down in some of the traditional requirements that may come with traditional URA funding, as this fund is not owned by the URA. Again, it just sits at the URA. So we can put that out for discussion. We can take that into committee. Councilman, you may have an answer now. Director Namangi Stanger, you might have an answer. But that's an issue I think we need to address, as well as those reports.
I'm happy to address it if you like, or so essentially I'll just take a first crack, but I mean, these are it's public funding, it's taxing body money. So city, county, and school district did sign up. And so then the URA is the agent for these funds. We are required to provide an annual report to the taxing bodies. And so we just need to be able to provide that reporting, make sure that the drawdowns are consistent with the grant agreement commitments, et cetera. So again, Mariva, yeah, these are flexible funding. This is flexible funding, and we certainly don't want to add any more strings or hurdles and barriers to the use and application of these funding. But we do need to make sure that when there's a grant agreement and there's a delineated use, we want to make sure that we can attest to the fact that they were used in that particular manner.
Okay, excellent. And so then if we're talking about facility upgrades and repairs, particularly for children, youth, and education services, as Alicia was speaking to, wouldn't the certifying body, wouldn't that serve as appropriate levels of certification to the URA that work was complete?
We would be looking for things like construction draws related to approved drawings by the city. We certainly have not that high level of expertise that Alicia George was speaking to. I mean, I don't even know what code she was referencing, but it's a high level of expertise.
Code, Sheila. It is a law. This is what we adhere to.
Yeah, so what we'd be looking for
for childcare facilities. It makes no sense to me.
So what we'd be looking for are what Alex had outlined, which are simple construction draws, invoices by a contractor who has completed that work, consistent with an overall contract, construction contract. We'd be looking for like bricks and mortar type activities, and making sure that those requested draws based on that agreement for the funding was consistent with those construction draws.
Okay, that sounds good. And I think that the committee can maybe, I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Alicia?
No, I was just saying what Sheila just said fits the project manager position.
I agree that the project manager would be able to view the project and determine or the documentation. I think that the difference may be, one, this is up to $25,000. So you're not going to be engaging in a large scale construction project for up to $25,000. This is probably going to be things like adding ADA ramps to a facility, adding rails to a banister, to staircases, perhaps getting new flooring at a facility, maybe a roof repair at a facility. It's up to $25,000. So I just want to make sure that this funding doesn't get encumbered in the way that sometimes traditional funding is encumbered, because I think that's the point. And I think that's one of the reasons the community is excited about this opportunity, is because they may not have to clear as many of the traditional bars that they would. So let's take it offline. I mean, I think the committee can vote on this as is, but let's move to the next one. I presume we'll vote on all of them at the same time.
Thank you, Marimba. So Sheila, I see your message that you have a meeting to go to and will rejoin. And then also I would like the record to reflect that Dr. Kimberly Ellis has joined us. Thank you, Kim, for being here as we move forward and through these discussions. And so the next recap I wanted to do of our committee meetings, the 2 meetings that we had in August following our July advisory board meeting. And this is about the Development Initiatives Program, which we are calling the DIP. And so the advisory board, when this was presented in July, had varied perspectives, which was assumed on the initial presenting of the guidelines in July. And some of those perspectives were, they thought the amount up to was too small. What we had proposed was up to 200,000. Others thought that it could be increased. That's supposed to say increased. And so what I had talked about in our meeting in July was that the line item currently is only 465,000. Utilizing some of the information I've received from some of the development projects that are in motion, close to finishing, or actually are a distance away from getting a shovel in the ground, I was trying to find some level of a sweet spot that we could all agree to at least approve these first initial guidelines and begin to get some monies out. So after having a discussion with our committee members, knowing that the amount is phrased as up to 250,000, we felt that could accommodate smaller projects who maybe need 125,000 to get a shovel in the ground. But we also were hopeful that it was large enough that it could close a gap, although the way the guidelines are written, this is last in funding, and 90% of the capital stack has to already be committed to be eligible for these funds. So we agreed that the 250,000 was a good number, with the caveat that we would like to recommend that a 2025, allocation for the DIP should be added to the line item so that there would be 2 years of funding commensurate with the other line items. And just to recap, The 2023 allocation for all the line items was agreed to. There was a 2024 allocation that has also been agreed to, but the only line item that does not have 2 years is the development initiatives line item, and that's because that money in 2023 went to supporting some housing stabilization efforts, which was super important. But at the same time, we're hopeful to increase that line item so that we could ideally support some more projects over the next year plus. Voting to have an allocation for 2025 would increase that line item to a total of $930,000, which I think now is a more significant number. And again, the vision here is that as a board, as everyone that's working on behalf of the reinvestment fund, we would be able to say that the investment of these dollars onto projects resulted in a tangible outcome. So we would literally be able to see projects now be able to come to fruition. Next slide, Julia.
I just have one comment on this one, Kirk, and that is, I just want to request that that name be changed to development program initiatives, as opposed to development initiatives programs, just because some people may get that confused with the DRP.
Okay, cool.
Okay?
Yep. DPI. I might like that a little better, Marimba. So yeah, that sounds good to me. Again, just to recap what I said. So we increased as a committee that up to amount to 250,000. We would like to recommend increasing that line item by a 2025 allocation, which would bring it up to 930K. The eligible grantees, and this is maybe something I didn't spell out when we met in July, but these are minority-owned entities based in the Greater Hill District that are encouraged to apply. Those who develop or doing development that is not located in the Greater Hill District would not be able to access any of these funds. And so, Dr. Ellis, I see your hand raised.
Yes, I just had a quick question. One of the things that we have discussed in the past was to have a line item for the housing, because it was just, we didn't have one. And so it was just under development. Have we created a line item for housing?
We haven't yet, Kim. Excuse me, Dr. Ellis.
That's
But
all good.
I
My
do.
friends call me Kim. Go ahead.
I do think that there's a need, to be honest. I talked about some of the people I've met with in the community, and I think you guys can all realize when you're taking in all these varied perspectives, how broad of a range people's ideas and thoughts can be. But housing does continue to come up in Kim, so I think that this is a conversation for the board to have sooner than later, to see if there are line items that potentially could be moved around, and if there's a way to maybe more specifically target some of the repairs. So maybe the expense isn't as large, maybe more people could be helped. But to put it more succinctly, Kim, I think that this is something that should be considered. But I think it's going to take the board working together to come up with what that formula looks like. Does that make sense?
Well, let me just share, what we've been through and where we are, right? So, one of the things that we discussed prior, at least the last, previous 2 years, was we weren't sure exactly how many people or what the need would be. We suspected that it would be great. We definitely suspected it. But once we actually put out the applications, we were easily overwhelmed, right? So we were only able to do 20 of however many applications we received. And I can't remember the exact number, but it was it like over 200 people or something like that?
285.
Yeah. So when we discussed, we discussed it in general here, and then we also had a committee meeting. Myself, Alicia, Richard, Lakeisha. And so that's when we realized, like, whoa, we don't have housing as a label under development. And we don't have to have it under development, but we didn't have housing as a label anywhere. So I think it's actually dangerous to we presented this to the general board, and I believe that the suggestion was, kind of to wait for you to come on and we're happy that you're here. But I think that it's very important for us to create the housing line item, because if we're going to pass this amount, and the reason why we increased the amount, or we're using these previous years, is because we know that housing is a great demand.
Yep.
And we do have data at least to back that up. We haven't done any other programs, so we don't have
Right.
the data to back up the other aspects, but we do have that. And I've already been getting calls, I'm sure y'all have as well, about, when is the housing going to open back up again? So I'm just, I don't know if I need to make a motion, but I would like to at least make a motion that we do go ahead and put the line item for housing under development initiatives before we say, oh, let's increase the development initiatives, because otherwise something else will come up, right? And then we say, oh, well, we dedicated 930,000, and these particular projects are going to add up to 600, so now we only have 300,000 for housing. And we already know if we're going to do like another 20, and we might not. I'm just saying, if we already know how much that costs. So that's what I wanted. So should I be making a motion, or?
Well, just really quickly, Kim, I wanted to respond, and I wanted to see if someone else wanted to respond. And yes, you're more than welcome to put forth a motion. The only feedback I have to what you said is, I don't think the development of another housing stabilization fund should be at the expense of 2 years of development initiative funding. And I don't think you're saying that, but I just wanted to be clear. I think that it would be worthwhile to put forth a motion to develop a committee that would not only look at how can the guidelines be structured to meet the need, and meet the need in a way where maybe it's more cost effective, to meet the need in a way where maybe the income guidelines aren't as restrictive to seniors who may be on a fixed income, who might be just above that guideline, but still have a need. But then also a big part of that committee work could be, where can other line items that haven't been spent down to date be adjusted outside of development initiatives to be able to do another phase of that type of repairs. And I just wanted to make sure I put those thoughts out there. Kim, before you put forth a motion, I just wanted to see, is there anyone else that has any thoughts related to what Kim just shared?
I have a comment on that. Thank you. I agree with you, Kirk. I think that one, we've already spent I believe it was $65,000 from the development initiatives for housing. And I think we all collectively know that housing is important, which is why $465,000 was taken from development. The cost of that, though, is that there are a number of projects within our community that have gaps and will continue to have gaps and not get done. Recently, someone posted what's going on with Center Avenue, right? And the reality is there are at least just recently, there were 2 projects that had gaps of $300,000 or less. Now there is one project that has a gap of, I think, it was $350,000 or less. That has a gap of $350,000. We have retail storefronts that are empty and in need of support by tenants for build out space. We have existing businesses on the corridor who may need funds to improve their space. We have struggling assets all up and down our commercial district. In addition to that, there are multifamily housing projects throughout the neighborhood that are also suffering from a gap. And those funds aren't easy to find. Right. Conversely, you have the Housing Opportunity Fund that's housed at the URA that residents of the Hill District who are homeowners can apply to. And so I think that continuing to eat away at the development initiatives line item it does not align with the Greater Hill District Master Plan, as the Greater Hill District Master Plan prioritized Center Avenue as the #1 priority for the community. That has been fortified over and over again. So I think that to take the funds away from development initiatives to give them to individual homeowners for improvements to their home actually does not honor the endorsed master plan for our community. So I agree that Kirk, with you, Kirk, I think that we can take this to committee. I also think that there's a mortgage assistance line that may be more appropriately moved to home ownership repairs. And then there are some other programs. I know the state just adopted a program, I believe, to put more money towards home ownership. So I just want to give us that insight that, I mean, this is already a very small amount for large scale development. I mean, it is a very, very small amount already. So I would recommend to the committee that they turn their attention to other line items to address the need for homeowner repairs. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you're making great points. Kim is making great points. And again, I just want to double down. I think we can do both, but not taking from development initiatives. So let's develop guidelines with other line items. And I think that
Alicia?
might be a great way forward.
Yeah,
Alicia,
I'll go after Alicia. Thank you.
sorry, Kim. Go ahead, Alicia. Alicia?
Oh, I thought Kim was talking. I'm sorry. You both kind of said it. I prefer us to meet on this because I, for one, think it should have its own line. And I think that some of these other allocation lines can be blended into it because we have two other lines related to housing. And I think we really, as a body, need to take a look at that based on the needs, the feedback, and everything. I don't think it should go under development initiatives. So I, too, am asking for a meeting before we take a vote and put it under development. I do believe it should have its own line and its own allocations for housing.
Thank you, Alicia. Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, which is hilarious. But and Alicia, Richard, those who were in the subcommittee meeting, remember where we last left off was we looked at the budget and we said, actually, some of these things need to be reallocated differently, right? And then we were saying, like, there's nothing for housing. So I am totally fine. And I do understand the needs of the development and the corridor. I'm pretty sure that in the Greater Hill District Master Plan, both housing and development of the major corridor are the two top priorities. Because if you don't have people that live in the Hill and that can contribute to your main corridor, then the businesses start closing, just like we saw downtown. Okay, so like these are the same things. So we want a healthy corridor, we want a healthy housing market. So I'm not going to make a motion. I'll be more than happy to go into committee. I just want to remind everybody that where we were was in the reallocation phase, and that we definitely said that the housing needed a line item. And yes, we should also be encouraging everybody to apply to the Housing Opportunity Fund from the URA. And yes, that new state funding is really important. So I'll wait. I brought it up for this exact reason. And partly, Kirk, because you said that, it was increased, partly you included housing as you were talking about the development initiatives and the reason for the increase in the income. So
before we move on, I want to say that our agenda item was to get the guidelines approved today, right? We keep pushing that date back. That's causing a lot of frustration within the community. I fear that to push back the development initiatives, once again, to consider how to take funds possibly from that to move it to housing, that delays our ability to accept the guidelines. So I want to make sure that the committee understands that by moving this particular item to committee, if that's what I'm hearing, I think that might be what I'm hearing, but I may be hearing, no, we're not going to move this off the voting agenda. We're going to we're going to discuss and explore the other ways that we can fund housing repairs. Which one?
That's what I heard. Remember, the latter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And Kim, I would look forward to working together with you on this committee related to housing outside of development initiatives. So let's get that done. But yes, Marimba, I agree with what you just said there. Okay. So I know we're about 45 minutes away from our time, and I'm happy to go over, but I know we all have tight schedules. So I would like to move on just a little bit more.
Please.
And Julia, if we can go to the next slide. So the next initiative I want to talk about is workforce initiatives. So the first three I laid out were the conversations we had in committee that went most smoothly and that had a consensus. The advisory board generally supported these guidelines, but thought the amount should be decreased. During the discussions with the committee, there was some internal discussion about was the intent of the guidelines the way they were written since I've been brought on board counter to the initial workforce development line item. And I think we landed somewhere where there's a clear distinction between workforce development and job placement. And so this guideline is written much more to be available to community-based entities that can provide training, outside of construction or traditional trades. And I've heard a desire amongst some of the community organizations that I've met with to be able to implement some of those programs, but to also be the lead in that implementation. And that kind of leads to the next piece here. There was a question about eligible applicants. And so the way they were initially written would include a public agency like Partner for Work, or an institution that's in the community like the Pitt CEC, would allow them to apply for those funds. But based off the feedback that we received, it was determined that the community-based organizations should be the lead. They should be the ones who would be eligible to receive these funds. They then could have subsequent related partnerships outside of that may include a public agency or an institution. But we wanted to ensure that these were community organizations that were actually the ones applying. Can you go to the next slide, Julia? And so what we recommended there was a decrease. So I believe the amount that we had proposed in July was 40,000. We reduced it to 30. Again, it's an up to amount. So it doesn't mean that every proposal is going to come in at 30,000. But just from some experience and again, conversations, that amount could pilot a program that could be effective and could potentially grow. I think some of our committee members really wanted to implore us to explore partnerships with workforce investment boards, workforce agencies, again, not as the lead, but as a partner that can come alongside and work under the leadership of a community-based organization. And so again, those were the things that we discussed, but we removed public agencies, educational institutions, workforce intermediaries, or labor organizations as being lead applicants with this initiative. Dr. Ellis.
Yes, so I wasn't in this meeting, but one of my concerns is I think I'm going to say the workforce intermediaries. And that's because I have full confidence in the different programs that get people into the construction trade, CDLs, things like that. They're doing a great job, but what they cannot do is a type of coaching, education, sort of non-standard encouragement around substance abuse. And it's one of the major issues that is preventing, that keeps the numbers of these programs too low. Like none of them reach capacity. And that's a problem because our community, we need to be reaching capacity in these programs because they are great programs. But what I found over and over again is that these programs, they just have a limit. They have a strong guideline. It says, you cannot, you cannot have like THC in your system, or you'll be discarded from, you will not be allowed to enter the program. But that's all they have. So there needs to be some type of allocation, I think, for a workforce intermediary. And it could be through the church. It could be through a neighborhood program. It could be an after school program, or not after school. Well, I mean, sort of, I guess you can. There are pre-apprentice programs. There needs to be something because this is a real issue.
Okay. And just to paraphrase Kim, because a workforce intermediary would be able to do some of the deep dive in terms of coaching, dealing with people from a community kind of perspective to be able to deal with some of these other issues that are preventing young people from taking advantage of workforce opportunities. Is that?
Yes, because I'm thinking about Reverend Grayson's program.
Mhm.
Those people that meet, with the young men, on Tuesdays and things like that. I think that that's very necessary, and if we don't have it in here, we should have something in here.
I'm not opposed to putting that back into the guidelines. Is there any strong thoughts or feelings from anyone else? So Kim, I think we would just, workforce intermediaries would be included. And I could work with Alex and the advisory board to just make sure that language is sharp. But we can include that.
Thank you.
Now, before we move on to our next recap of our committee meeting, the three that I just presented to you, the Children's Youth and Education, the Development Program Initiative, the DPI, and the Workforce Development Initiatives, were the three where we had, again, the most effective, robust conversation, and where the committee came to some level of a consensus. And so I feel strongly about those three programs, and I think those programs are potentially ready for approval. This next initiative, if we can go to the next slide, is the one that I really think is going to take the most conversation to move forward on, and I'll just kind of lay out, kind of where we've landed with this. And so,
Kirk,
yes,
can we pass on the first three, maybe? At least we know that that's been accomplished, and then go into, see if they get approved. That's the intent for today, and then go into the next issues, because at least something is accomplished.
that's up for you all to decide, Rev.
I move that we at least try to go through the first three to see if we can get consensus.
Are you asking specifically, Reverend Grayson, that we actually vote on the first three?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Councilman Lavelle, are you in agreement with that approach?
I think that makes sense, yes.
All right. You want to set forth and call for the motion?
Reverend Grayson, would you care to make a motion to approve the first three, which were, state them again, Kurt, just for the
Yeah.
record?
Children's Youth and Education, Development Program Initiatives, and Workforce Development Initiatives.
With the caveat of the one that Kim mentioned about adding into,
Adding
yes.
workforce intermediaries into that eligible. Yep.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The recommendation has passed.
Thank you. Okay, so I did want to talk about this next bucket of work. So we heard and we hear a call for thinking through housing. This is already an initiative that we proposed the guidelines for in July. And again, the discussion just has been robust, and I think we all are just going to have to take some time. It's going to be a labor of love to really understand how to move our small business, minority, women-owned business initiative forward. And so, dating back to our conversation in July, there was a suggestion to have a three-tiered type of program. And just from memory, I think some of that was related to the amount I had set originally was only up to 25,000, where if we were talking about a jump start or a new initiative, somewhere closer to 50 would be needed. We wanted to have potential tiers where we could separate something that's new and a completely new business or a new initiative versus operational support for existing businesses, which is also important. And in tier three, and this is my paraphrasing, Kim, from your recommendation, but also providing some smaller level grants to community based entrepreneurs or innovators and creatives, maybe in an early ideation or pilot stage. And so we met on the 13th. And I think one of the great suggestions that came out, and it also came out towards the end of our meeting in July, was could we match or partner with the CDFI so that some of the small business program could be a grant and maybe some of it could be a loan. So we imagine what that could look like. there was just, and this relates to some of our conversation we had earlier this evening, just concern or just wanting to know how much additional administrative costs may be incurred by potentially partnering with the URA or one of its affiliates. So maybe designing our own criteria, but using that existing infrastructure to kind of get some of those dollars out? Or was there another CDFI in the community or elsewhere that may be a good partner there? And so initially, the recommendation was to kind of go back and really focus on tier 1 and tier 2, as we needed to think through more about how to design criteria for tier 3, knowing that it was a much smaller grant, much smaller than what the URA would typically give out. And at the time of those committee meetings, the language I had around tier 3 wasn't as strong as tier 1 and 2. And so we came back on the 20th. And again, in July, we also had committee members who urged us to think through some of our small business lending or small business programming more as a lending program, more as loans, to start to create this revolving loan fund, even if it starts small, but to get us kind of used to that type of practice. And so our second committee meeting really focused heavily on what would it look like if our small business and minority programs were more loan focused, with interest rates as small as 1%, maybe up to 3%, money that we know would get back. And could we pilot something for, a year or two, based off some of the monies that we had in that line item? And again, there continued to be some concern and just need for clarity around what some of those administrative costs would be if we partner with the URA, which seems natural, right? Or an affiliate, or is there another CD FI? And so can you go to the next slide, Julia? Oh, so go, oh, sorry, you can go back for a second, Julia, and I can just speak a little more and then we can go here. But because of the robust nature of the conversation, because of not necessarily coming to a shared understanding as to how to incorporate all 3 tiers, whether or not we wanted to do partial grants and partial loans, or whether we wanted to start out right away by piloting a revolving loan fund with very small interest rates. This is something that was just not ready for us to vote on. And my strong recommendation is, we have a lot of great expertise on the board. I was really pleased to see everyone who was involved with these committee meetings. And I think anyone who really has an ear towards what small businesses need, how we can craft a revolving loan fund, this needs to be a continued committee conversation. Now, ideally, we would still be hoping to get this approved, in the short term. But I think just focusing on minority business, small business initiatives for a couple meetings is really going to help us figure out how to best get this over the finish line. Is there anyone that was involved with this committee conversation specifically that wants to add maybe a little more color? Are there any thoughts around potential partners that could be a CDFI, the URA, or otherwise? I just wanted to open that up before we moved on to some of the remaining parts of our conversation.
And I say, I don't know how to raise hands, but
Well, I can hear you, Richard, so thank you.
okay. We would be very interested in doing sort of maybe even a match. If there's a grant funding, matching those funds, or at least 50% of if it's $40,000, giving 50% of that in a small business line of credit. That would be very attractive to us. We would allocate potentially toward that effort, we could allocate maybe $500,000 toward it as a pot. So that if a small business got the jump start, as mentioned here, they would also have to have funding to sustain themselves. So I think that would be an appropriate approach to help them not only to get started, but also sustain themselves for a period of time. So that sounds very attractive to us.
Thank you, Richard.
Mhm.
Anyone have any comments related to what Richard just shared or any other thoughts?
I'll say I agree with what Richard said, but I think that the lower tier, the tier threes, I don't think those should be business lines of credit. Um, I think that, sometimes a business line of credit can deter people from even starting, they'll just, and, these are going to be some tough times ahead. So I want to
Kim,
say at least for tier three.
honestly, Kim, I think this, we can talk offline about it because I was trying to interpret the spirit in which you brought that up, but I think there's still some information that maybe we could talk through that would help me develop a more descriptive need for that, so that this could be something we consider.
Okay.
Anyone else have any strong thoughts here? So, Richard, I think your suggestion there sounds amazing. And I really would love for you to be involved in some of these discussions we're going to schedule over the next month, schedule permitting.
Okay,
So,
just let me know and I'll try to make myself available.
sounds great. Okay, and so I want to try to close us out. This conversation we might need more time to have it than we have left for this meeting today, but I think it's a great point, jump off point to have this discussion in a little more detail. So as we see, especially related to the MWBE initiatives, there continued to be this theme about what is the administrative lift if we, partner with the natural partner, URA, or another CDFI. What is that expense going to be? And it really brought to light that we need to have these discussions now about what it looks like to implement these programs. What are some of the tasks that are needed to implement? And we already had some of these discussions earlier around the children's, youth, and education. What are some things that I can be able to handle as a program manager, especially as I grow in my experience and understanding? But what are some things that we absolutely need some support for? And so, Julia, if we can go to the next slide. And so what I did here, and this is based off, my understanding, my questions, my interviews, my conversations with staff, some of my research, just looking at what we may need for some of these programs to be implemented, particularly as it relates to things that are related to development or construction or loans. What are some things that I can take on? What are some things, again, that we need support from, whether that's from the URA or otherwise? And so I'll just walk through. It's just three kind of high level areas and what some of those tasks entail. And so one is creating a pipeline of applicants and being that initial intake person. This naturally falls right within my wheelhouse and my duties as project manager. So meeting with applicants, community members, businesses, explaining eligibility and guidelines, collecting applicant materials, ensuring some level of confidentiality, coordinating technical assistance. Those are clearly things that I would see align with my work. Underwriting would be a key component. Again, specifically if we're doing any lending, reviewing budgets and pro forma, funding sources and capital stack, assessing financial feasibility and project readiness, and all the other things that entail, excuse me, guys, the underwriting process. This clearly would be something that would not be naturally within my apologies. Construction and oversight. So monitoring a project schedule, scope and budget. That to me sounds like the work of a project manager. Conducting site visits and assessing progress. Again, those are things that I think if those skill sets don't exist now, being able to shadow, that those are skills that I could build. But I think to Shashila's earlier point, construction that has draw requests, so there's monies being drawn down or there's documentation or things that are needed for certain projects. I think that is going to take a level of expertise that would be outside of my scope of work. Thank you, Sushila. And then can we go to the next slide, Julia? And then some of the other key, and this isn't everything, guys, but this is kind of what I've been able to ascertain as key components. One would be reporting and portfolio management, so tracking performance milestones, submitting quarterly program reports. Again, this to me would fall within the sphere of the work that I can complete. Just having very clear milestones set forth in a grant agreement or in any type of loan document. Being able to get those quarterly program reports, and not only to ensure that projects are on task and being able to achieve what they set out to achieve, but just so that we're able to tell the stories of the success we have in community, et cetera. Contracting and closing, the preparation of grant agreements, the legality and the legal information that's going to have to go into that, having someone execute documents, that is going to require some level of legal oversight. And then the labor and compliance tracking, so the requirement related to MWBE reporting, the assurance that the prevailing wage is being met. Those are things that, again, would take a level of expertise that would be outside of my duties as a project manager. And so before you guys respond, I think there's one more slide. And these are just some questions to maybe consider. And I worked with Julia and Alex to think about these. Again, I do think this is a important conversation to have. But, you know, how does the board envision URA staff being engaged in terms of grant or loan administration? If the URA does not administer the reinvestment fund programs, the following should be considered: that there's going to be a need for construction and monitoring, inspections, contract management. And I think right now the URA is maybe shorter than they've traditionally been on the amount of inspectors. So the board would have to think through what that would look like. The legal drafting and review and negotiations, general legal issues, there's going to have to be an entities, people, et cetera, that deal with that. The loan processing, monitoring, and collections, labor compliance. Again, I had that on the last slide. So I just wanted to lay these out. I think this is going to be more than a 15-minute discussion, but I think it's critical as we approve guidelines, we have to concurrently think about implementation. And I think we are, as a board, going to have to think about where does it make sense to partner with the URA and related programs. Where would it make sense to have another partner? Richard just laid out a amazing opportunity to be a partner within the fund. And where are there opportunities to maybe contract with an individual that can do some of the inspection work that may be needed as we start to get monies out to key projects. I'm going to stop talking here. I know this is a lot to think about, guys. This could be, I want to just kind of have an open dialogue now. We can formally continue this discussion as one of our agenda items as we move forward. And Britt has a question. Can you clarify? Sorry, Britt. What is included in the URA 10% admin fee? And so maybe that's a good place to start. Sushila, Alex, or Julia, and I'm not sure if Tom is still on the call, but can you guys take a shot at explaining from your perspective what is all included in the 10% admin fee? Because I think that's where some of the disconnect is occurring.
Oh, hi Kirk, it's Alex. Just one moment while I pull it up on the okay, the reinvestment fund guidelines. So it's not a 10% admin fee. The requirement is that the URA shall collect, and this is quoted from the guidelines. The URA shall collect an annual fee for administration of the fund equal to actual staff time and costs incurred related to the administration of the fund. So there's not a 10% carve out. It's a when URA staff is working on reinvestment fund matters, that's billed directly to the fund, kind of based on URA salaries.
I didn't think there
it does
was.
not say.
Okay,
10%.
I thought that at some point there was. I thank you for reading that, Alex. The 10% has been out there for a while, and it's been a while since we've revisited the verbatim language. But Britt has a similar question here on what does that include exactly? Were there specifications in those same guidelines you were just reading on what those tasks include?
No, so when we're we bill to the reinvestment fund the same way that we bill to any other like heavily audited program. Basically, it's a calculation based on hours spent on a project assessed against the staff member's salary. So it's we don't take anything beyond what what actual time is spent on reinvestment fund matters.
Okay, well, I have a couple of suggestions here. One, I think that we can pivot from a lot of the administrative costs that we have incurred to you all participating as necessary based on the needs of the committee. So, for example, some of the items that are here on the screen fit very naturally with some of the duties of the URA. And so maybe we can reduce your time on calls like this, maybe with the exception of one person, and reduce your time on administrative items as we now have a project manager who is responsible for that. So we don't want to be incurring costs, particularly for, senior staff and executive staff for 2 and 3 hour meetings, when at the end of the day, that just may not bring the value that we need from the URA. So why don't we really begin to think of reducing this kind of time that may be a demand for you all that's not necessary, and shifting that time to what will probably be a lower expense for the committee to do some of the monitoring or review or compliance items that are listed on the screen. With that said, I think I should also say, I think it might be a good idea for us to, when this goes into discussion in committee, to think about the fact that the URA is already funding a lot of these projects that funding would be going into. So I would presume you will already have an inspector or a compliance monitor who is going out on behalf of the URA. Would that be a correct assumption?
Remember, that's correct. Yeah, and I think that's why we're so supportive of the development initiatives program. It's because the legwork has already been done there. If there's not URA funding, there's other funders in there that are going to require these kind of compliance monitoring to the extent that the URA is. We're not kind of recreating the wheel for each project. We're able to kind of strategically direct that money. So
Right.
you are correct there.
Okay, so then I think that if that is the case, then the URA can kind of think through how to support us in a way that makes sense for our budget, as well as that makes sense for the I guess the compliance measures that will make both the committee, well, especially the committee, feel confident and comfortable. So for example, if you are already going out, or if there's, say, a county investment in a fund or a state investment in a fund, if there is a federal tax credit investment, all of these already have monitors and compliance consultants who are responsible for making sure that the project happens the way the project happens. And normally those things are defined at closing, right? At closing, it says, these are the things that have to happen at this time. So your money, if we're giving $250,000, for example, for development, that $250,000 is going into a larger capital stack where there are already compliance measures and benchmarks that are defined that have to meet those benchmarks in order to access all of the funding of the project. So is there any reason why we wouldn't just be able to kind of use those existing mechanisms?
Remember, this is Tom. I think that's something something for us to consider. I generally agree that, to the extent the projects that we're talking about investing in have all this, have a variety of other public financing in them, which again, without knowing exactly what projects would receive money, I can imagine there are, projects that would already be receiving, other public monies and monies that flow through the URA. That, in my sense, is that something we should look at and probably can just piggyback, generally speaking, onto existing activity. So those are good comments and something we can consider and make sure that we report back on.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we want to keep our expense as low as possible, and we've been fortunate here to, get Kirk on board and to relieve you all of the, of the demand on your collective time, which will also relieve the budget for the committee. And then we can bring the URA staff in as necessary to help to enforce and or review the things that we don't feel like we have the capacity to do without the URA staff.
Thank you, Marimba. Is there anyone else that has any thoughts here? And I did hear some really strong suggestions. It feels like there's some synergy. And hopefully this was a productive part. I know it was, rushed and we can have this conversation as needed, but I think there were some very clear points that were outlined. And, ideally, this would alleviate some of the concern and would help us continue to advance the guidelines that were just approved and those that we're hoping to approve moving forward. So I think that this was positive. Again, I want to leave. Yeah, if there's anyone, go ahead.
Sorry, do we, should we make a motion on the reallocation of URA time? Or is this just a general understanding? I mean, it seems like it's something that should be decidedly clear, as we move forward.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to, I'll state clearly what my intent was, to relieve URA from administrative time being committed to things that our project manager is capable of fulfilling, such as meeting management and administering the task of the fund as outlined here. And that the committee will specifically request the involvement of the URA on items that we believe we need additional support. If anybody is willing to make that motion, they can say so move. And
yes, I moved. That's fine.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Is anyone abstaining? Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide, Julia, which I believe is just adjournment. Before there's a motion to adjourn the meeting, I would just like to say this was, I think, a very productive and strong meeting, particularly being that the second meeting that I've been able to be involved in and lead. I'm super excited at what lies ahead in the very near future. Marimba, and I'll give you the floor to maybe speak to the Lerner financial report, but I just wanted to express my excitement about the momentum that we're continue to able to foster and build and look forward to future conversations. Marimba, is that something you want to elevate to the group here?
No, we can adjourn and make sure that we handle these items at the next public meeting.
Okay.
So for clarity, are we ready to go to the URA board meeting for September with at least the passing of the three items that the board passed today?
Thank you for bringing that up, Reverend Grayson. I have no concerns about that, but I think Councilman Lavelle would be more equipped to answer that, given his role as vice chair of the URA board.
My understanding is that the URA will still need to, well, one, I have no problem moving it forward to the URA board. I'll state that. I do believe staff will probably have to do just an internal review and make sure there's no glaring issues. But I have no problem working with them to get it to the next URA board meeting, which would be September.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilman Lavelle, has anybody given you an update that you can pass on to this board around clarity of the LERTA?
I don't understand the question.
No, I was just wondering if anybody had given you an clarification around the LRTA, the terms, and so on and so forth, because it just became clear to me that there was, I don't know if it's, I don't know what to call it, but I'll just say, there was some false information presented. There's been misinformation presented. There's been some cross information shared. And so I think just in general, I think that the LRTA itself needs to be clarified. And so I think that that's really important for this board. So I was just wondering if anybody had talked to you about it, but
No.
okay. Well, yeah, we should put it on the agenda, and I think that there has to be, I don't know if it's Craig. Somebody needs to add some clarity, because there's misinformation out there.
Okay, if there are no other comments, we are ready to adjourn. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Kirk, for the hard work over the past 60 days. And Councilman Lavelle, we're going to look forward to you stewarding this process through the URA approval process so that we can get funds out to the community. Thank you all so much for your time, energy, and effort.
Thank you.
The meeting is adjourned.